Imagine for a moment a world where the United States decides to take over Venezuela. This could be through a full-scale military invasion, a carefully orchestrated political takeover, or overwhelming economic dominance. It's a dramatic scenario, but it immediately brings up huge legal questions, both here at home in the US and on the world stage. To really get a handle on the rights and wrongs of such a move, we need to dive into the US Constitution, federal laws, and the international rules that are supposed to protect every country's right to govern itself. Let's start by looking at it from a US domestic law perspective. Could a president even do this legally? Well, there are arguments for it. The Constitution names the President as the Commander-in-Chief, giving them broad powers to act, especially when they see a threat to national security. Throughout history, presidents have used this executive power to take military action without waiting for a green light from Congress. Another path could be through Congress itself. If Congress passed a law authorizing action against Venezuela, maybe using its power over foreign trade or the War Powers Resolution, it could be framed as perfectly legal under US law. Proponents might also argue that Venezuela's friendships with countries like Russia, China, or Iran create a direct strategic threat to the US, making intervention a necessary evil for national security. But on the other hand, there are major legal roadblocks. The most significant is the War Powers Resolution of 1973. This law was specifically designed to stop presidents from waging war on their own. It says a president can only commit U.S. forces for 60 to 90 days without getting approval from Congress. A full takeover of a country would blow way past that deadline. Beyond that, our whole system of government is built on checks and balances. Congress controls the money and has the sole power to declare war. Any president trying to conquer a nation without Congress's consent would be stepping way over their constitutional line. And we can't forget about human rights. US laws, like the Leahy Law, actually incorporate international human rights standards. This law stops the US from giving aid to foreign military units that commit abuses. So, if a takeover resulted in harm to civilians, the US could find itself breaking its own laws. Now, let's zoom out and look at this from an international law perspective. It gets even more complicated here. Those in favor of a takeover might use a humanitarian intervention argument. They could point to human rights abuses, government corruption, or the ongoing humanitarian crisis in Venezuela and say they have a responsibility to protect, or R2P, the Venezuelan people. The US could also argue that the chaos in Venezuela is a threat to its neighbors, and that action is needed for regional security, maybe even getting support from the Organization of American States, the OAS. However, the arguments against it under international law are incredibly strong. Thinking about the broader fallout, the consequences would be massive. Diplomatically, our allies in Europe and Latin America would almost certainly condemn the action. The US could even find itself hit with sanctions. Economically, the cost would be staggering. American taxpayers would be footing the bill for a long and difficult military occupation and then for rebuilding an entire country. And think about the global oil markets. The instability would send shockwaves everywhere. But perhaps the biggest cost would be to America's moral legitimacy. Even if the US tried to frame it as a humanitarian mission, the world would likely see it as old-school imperialism, a powerful nation imposing its will on a weaker one. This would completely undermine America's ability to promote democracy and human rights anywhere else in the world. Who would listen to us after that? So, to wrap this all up, while there might be some creative legal arguments to justify a takeover from a US domestic standpoint, our constitutional system of checks and balances provides a strong defense against it. And when you look at international law, the case is overwhelming. A unilateral takeover of a sovereign nation is illegal. The supposed benefits, like protecting national security or promoting regional stability, are dwarfed by the massive downsides. Breaking our own constitution, violating international law, and destabilizing the entire global order. It's a powerful lesson in the constant tension between a nation's power and the laws that are meant to restrain it. Thanks for watching, and if you found this breakdown interesting, make sure to like and subscribe for more deep dives into global affairs.